Several months ago, I attended a screening by a West Papuan filmmaker. As many interesting points were raised at this event, I decided to find out more, and so read Maire Leadbeater's excellent book, See No Evil.
The Pacific has been colonized. The Pacific is being colonized. Their land, their rights, their human rights. And as a consequence of that, we now have a country where the majority of the citizens are migrants. So West Papua now has more what they call trans migrants than indigenous. And the indigenous people have malnutrition, they have hunger, they have disease. They have children dying of measles. They have HIV. They have forests dying and being stripped. They have gold mines and mountains being raped.
I have the very pleasant duty this evening to introduce our guest, Wensislaus Fatuban. He's got a lot to contribute in terms of the films he's made about the environmental destruction in West Papua. Wensi is much more than an environmental filmmaker, of course. He's working with an NGO in Geneva called Geneva for Human Rights, and with that group of fellow activists and solidarity supporters in Geneva, he's working at the highest level of the UN Human Rights Council, monitoring what governments are doing at the UN level, and it includes monitoring what our government is doing at the UN level. And of course, I have to tell you, it ain't so great. It ain't so great at all. What we would like our government to do is one thing. We'd like our government very simply to support self-determination for the West Papuan people. But even short of that, we'd like them to have a strong voice on human rights, and I don't think it's happening. And Wensi's someone who can bring those things together for us too. Of course, the other side that's perhaps really critical here too is that when he's not in Geneva, he's working in West Papua. And he's working with young filmmakers. So what he's realised, I think, is it's all very well to become a filmmaker and to use your own voice, but the really important thing is to be able to encourage other young people to also take up the camera and to use it to record what's happening, be that human rights abuses, be that environmental devastation, and to use it in a way that will advance the struggle. He in one of the articles I read about him, he used the term, it is the weapon of choice. It's a non-violent way of bringing the message through to people, a non-violent way of advancing the struggle for the West Papuan people.
So thank you for introducing West. Example is when military and police shoot dead some West Papuan student. For Indonesia to respect on West Papuan's right, but the recommendation until today, Indonesian government doesn't implement in West Papua. Last month, during the UNGA meeting, some Pacific leaders addressed the recent government lying about what happened in West Papua. They told they developed in Papua, they told that about human rights, they respect. But look, it doesn't respect. The English government that doesn't recognize indigenous people. It is we have to take note of this. And they put that Indonesian is indigenous people. So how come? You know, Japanese people from Java, they come to West Papua and they belong to indigenous peoples. It is true. Fair. It is not true. Indigenous people always they live in their land. They exist in their land.
On my Tangi Day, I attended a celebration hosted by Ngāti Whātua at Okahu Bay. One wonders why West Papuans cannot enjoy the same freedoms in their land as we do in ours.
Maire, te rea waiata, o tātou tēnei whānau kone, Ngāti Whātua o rākei kaumātua kuia hoki. Ko te pai number 1 o Aotearoa. Ko soon koe rea rātu te hui. Engari, we have in our whānau here, we have whānau here who are 88 plus. 80s, 70 plus, 70s, 60s. If you're younger than that, well, maybe you shouldn't be here. You should be out there, but they are. I want to remind people that this Pendu on this land, when they were teenagers, they were here. They were here. There's a lot of kōrero about the whole place of Urake. But I want to assure you that our kaumata kuia are very much adapted to the awhimai, to the oneness of this space. And today we are sharing it with you here today. And we thank you for being part of us here today. Great to see you paki paki. Don't throw coins up onto the stage. Throw the notes because they fly in the air with the breeze is coming down this way. Nā reira. Enjoy. Waitangi Day is about expression. For us here today, it is about unity ki te kotahitanga. Nā reira kia koutou. Tēnei te mihi ana kia koe ki koutou. A tēnā koutou, a kia ora himai no tātou.
After reading See No Evil, I visited Maire Leadbeater and asked her about some of the issues raised in her book, a book which is published by the University of Otago Press in Dunedin.
A few questions regarding West Papua, starting more or less at the beginning. In 1960, the then New Zealand Prime Minister Walter Nash urged Australia and Indonesia to prepare the people of New Guinea for independence. What was the outcome of that initiative?
Okay, well, first of all, that's an initiative that I think is not at all well known, but it is an initiative that was really a good one, and an initiative put forward by our Prime Minister of the day in the spirit of supporting self-determination and in the spirit of decolonisation, which was very much the focus in the world at that time. It was definitely a huge focus in the United Nations, with many African nations achieving their independence in 1960 and around that time. And Walter Nash's idea was based on the idea that here were these two colonies, if you like, one under Australian control, that's today's Papua New Guinea, and the other one, Netherlands, New Guinea, or West New Guinea, under the control of the Dutch. And both of them talking about bringing their territories to independence eventually. So Walter Nash's idea was, why didn't the two combine and bring the whole island to independence together? He was realistic, he knew this would take a long time, but he thought it was a worthwhile proposal, and he actually pursued it. He pursued it in press conferences when he went to the Netherlands, and he got his officials to pursue it with their fellow diplomats. But unfortunately, it didn't succeed. Looking back on it, Walter Nash was not aware of the very strong pressure that Indonesia was asserting at that time to take West New Guinea back into the Indonesian fold. And his diplomats, as they went around the world and talked this over with fellow diplomats, fellow Western diplomats and so on, realised that the Walter Nash plan had little chance of success. It was unfortunate because I think, it was really in line with what the Papuan people themselves wanted and what they were beginning to discuss. Elite members of the communities on both sides were beginning to discuss that possibility of reuniting the whole island of New Guinea as one country.
Well, it almost seems like common sense, actually, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, well, anyone who looks at the map of New Guinea and sees the colonial line drawn down the 131st parallel can see for themselves, really, that this was an arbitrary, absolutely arbitrary line drawn back in the 19th century, and one in which the Melanesian Papuan people had no say.
Yes, and still have no say.
And still have no say.
And successive New Zealand governments have since refused to face the issue of self-determination for West Papuans.
Yes, I think that's one reason why the Nash Initiative stands out, because it was the last time, really, that a New Zealand government sincerely stood on the side of the rights of the Papuan people to self-determination. It's after that the Western club, if you like, decided that the thing to do was to support Indonesia's claim to the territory.
Yes. Our government stresses the importance of New Zealand's business and military ties with Indonesia.
They do. I mean, if you look at it, Indonesia is our 11th largest trading partner. That's, so definitely that's a consideration for them. But I would personally emphasise, rather than our trading issues and our business issues, we should also be looking at the fact that New Zealand has always supported the Western aims for the Southeast Asian region, if you like, and going back historically, which is what I think is so important in this book, is looking at things historically. Going back historically, the huge importance of Indonesia to the United States was to keep that enormous country out of the communist camp and to ensure its future as a loyal member of the Western aligned groupings, and a country that would support US
there was
strategy.
Also, I think your book also points out that the British were concerned in the 1950s that there not be anything that impeded the movement of goods or whatever between Malaya and Australia, that these two outposts of the empire.
Well, that's again another sort of, again you have to look at things very much in a historical context, because if you go right back to the 1950s and the early 1960s, Malaysia and Singapore had strong left-wing movements.
Yes.
And so did the other outposts of Britain's colonial empire in Borneo and Sarawak. And in fact, the people in Borneo and Sarawak envisaged another future, an alternative future, not within the Confederation of Malaysia as they are today, but that was not something Britain would ever want to contemplate. They saw it much more desirable to reunite all their previous colonies into the Federation of Malaysia.
Well, in fact, all those Laos, Thailand, Vietnam and Indonesia all had strong communist movements.
I know, we forget it now.
Yeah.
We forget it now. People saw another future for themselves, a future where they would have more say over their destiny.
How much pressure have Australia, Britain and the United States exerted on New Zealand with regards to our relationship with Indonesia?
Well, I'd actually turn that one around a little bit. I don't think they need to put much pressure on us, because it's ingrained in the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and in our diplomatic service that we are part of that Western grouping. We're in an alliance called the Five Eyes or UK-USA agreement. We have been since early 50s, and that colours all our thinking. I recall a quote from Nicky Hager where he quotes an unnamed diplomat who says, when we, this might be a wee bit rough, but I think this is the sense of it, when we have an issue and we want to know just what position New Zealand could take, first of all we have a look and see what the British position is, and then we might have a look and see what the Canadian position is, and then we see what the Australians are saying, and then we decide what New Zealand will say. What we started with, talking about Walter Nash and his initiative, is another example of that. The thing that happened with his initiative was it got shown around to our mates and friends, and there it sort of gradually died. It's not entirely true, and it's important not to be too pessimistic about that, because we did stand up. We stood up in the 1980s when we decided to go nuclear free. We stood up to the United States. They were very, very antagonistic to our decision to bar nuclear warships, but we went ahead. And there's a few other things we can look at too. I mean, we did take, mostly driven by popular movements, our stand on apartheid and so on. And one good example of a sort of initiative was when we did help out with bringing the warring sides together in the conflict in Bougainville. That happened towards the end of the 90s. And that showed a bit of independent initiative, and it was successful to a degree. So, it is possible for New Zealand to act and to take a stand that's outside what our friends want us to do. And what really matters there, the crucial thing I think is usually popular pressure from ordinary people. And that's where the West Papua thing comes in, because we have got a groundswell of feeling in this country for the rights of the West Papuan people, and we need to really strengthen and develop that movement to the point where the New Zealand government can't just cast us aside, as they tend to do at present.
And Papua New Guinea is also under considerable pressure not to antagonise Indonesia?
Yes, at the government level. That's another one of those little contrasts, isn't it? There's a very strong feeling amongst ordinary people, amongst church groups. In fact, I don't know when I've ever met an ordinary person from Papua New Guinea who wasn't on the side of the West Papuan freedom movement, But at the government level, well, they've signed agreements of understanding way back in the 1980s when they were having a big issue with asylum seekers coming from West Papua into Papua New Guinea. And the government of Papua New Guinea never dares to really stand up to Indonesia over West Papua. But again, could change. There's some people at quite high levels, governors and people in Parliament who speak out incredibly strongly. There's Powers Parkop, he's Gary Juffa, a number of politicians who are willing to speak out very strongly and really challenge on this issue. So I wouldn't assume that will stay the same forever.
Now, our government claims that the aim of their engagement with Indonesian military and police forces is to improve Indonesian security. Yeah,
well, to some extent, they're Engagement with the Indonesian military, yeah, they sign these memorandums of agreement and so on, and that, in actual fact what I struggle with a wee bit with our military ties with Indonesia is getting the hang of the full extent of it, because I ask questions under the Official Information Act and some of them get declined, you know, I just know nothing. For example, we're actually exporting some strategic military goods to Indonesia, including aircraft parts, and I can't, despite, you know, trying to find out, I have not yet managed to find out exactly who is doing that, but definitely it's happening. It's in those reports from our customs and so on. We are still training one Indonesian officer most years at our staff training college down in Wellington, and yeah, 1 year, I don't know whether it was what happened exactly, but 1 year we trained someone from Kopassus, their elite crack force, you know, and we tried to write letters and say, well, before we had this person coming, did we actually try and find out whether they had a human rights record or anything like that? And the government said no, we didn't ask any questions. So although it's a relatively small engagement, it's something that we're very concerned about, because it sends a strong message that we think that the Indonesian military is okay, when we know it is still behind all kinds of terrible human rights abuses, yes, especially in West Papua.
They routinely assault ethnic, racial and religious groups.
Yes, yeah, and the thing about that too is that they're very seldom ever held to account. I mean, if you go right back to 2001, you've got the murder by Kopassus representatives, Kopassus personnel, of Teus Elaway, who at that stage was the chairman of the Papuan Presidium and, you know, sort of like a hugely important leader in West Papua. And he's murdered, and yes, a few officers are kind of held to account, but only a very, very short period of penalty, and then most of them back in their positions again. So that level of impunity is what's most concerning. It's the offences never held to account, and just ongoing, as we know right now in the highlands of West Papua.
And of course their military, the relationship between their military and their government is quite different from what we have with ours. Quite different.
Yes, their funding is different.
Yeah. Their access to power.
Their access to power is much greater, and presidents are usually very reluctant to actually challenge them. And what we see often is fine statements by the president that he's going to follow up these various cases of human rights abuses. And perhaps a sincere intent on his part to do that, but it usually goes...
Well, somewhere between 100,000 and 500,000 ethnic West Papuans have been killed.
Yes, and the thing about what's happening in West Papua is it's not just people being killed in some kind of clash with the military or police that you need to look at. It is the conditions of life, what is happening to people, because of the way that Indonesia is insisting that the way they'll get the West Papuans on side and happy to be part of Indonesia is economic development.
Yes.
And this is incredibly destructive. It is so destructive. I just, you know, cannot really get my head around it. One of the things they're doing at the moment is trying to build a thing called a Trans-Papua Highway to sort of unite the country across, you know, one end to the other. Sounds all right, but if anyone who's flown over West Papua or visited it and sees how incredibly rugged the country is and how deeply forested it is, will realise that putting a highway through is the most destructive thing you could imagine. You know, putting huge earthworks across these terribly vulnerable areas. It's a shocking thing to do. And not only that, the palm oil conglomerates and the forestry conglomerates are pretty much given a free rein. There's all kinds of ways they get around the rules, and at the moment what's facing West Papua is the sort of potential loss of yet more forest cover, and that is so damaging for the indigenous people.
Well, not just people, but elephant populations have been displaced also, haven't they? Like elephants have been moved.
No elephants in West Papua. No,
Aren't there?
no.
Okay.
It's a Pacific country. So what's at risk in West Papua is not, people think palm oil orangutans, for example. No orangutans in West Papua either.
Okay.
But there are literally hundreds of species of rare birds, animals, plants that live in that forest that are endemic to that area. It's a treasure trove of biodiversity. So that's a threat. As is global climate change. We'll never get to our goal of less than 2% by 2030 if we keep ripping out intact forests. And West Papua is particularly in that focus at the moment because forests have disappeared in other areas of Indonesia, Sumatra and Borneo and so on. So there's only sort of like West Papua, the last frontier, and if you look at what's happening at the moment, Indonesian government again, good statements about putting moratoriums on forestry, but somehow or other the forestry magnates and the palm oil magnates seem to get around the rules, and this huge area is currently at threat. That's why we campaign strongly against New Zealand buying kwila. There's an constant import of kwila from West Papua.
A hardwood.
A lovely hardwood, a beautiful wood, admittedly, but it comes at the expense of the West Papuan forests and the West Papuan people. And we should not use it. We should not have it coming here. It should be banned. It's a species that's threatened with extinction. Greenpeace have been documenting this for years. They say probably only another 30 years or so and it'll all be gone. And that's partly because we like using it in our decks. We're not the major market for it. Of course, China and Europe take a lot too. But still, we should not be bringing it here.
Well, Thailand found out with those floods, didn't they, what happens after deforestation.
Well, that's another thing that happens in West Papua too.
Yeah.
Yes. After floods. Yeah.
How secure are our ideas of human rights and freedom?
Yeah, I think a lot of people just kind of, it's kind of hidden from view, New Zealand's complicity in human rights abuses, if you like, the fact that we don't seem to dare, we'll take kwila for example. Why can't we take a stand against kwila? The government itself is on the record as saying yes, kwila should be listed with the Convention on Endangered Species, CITES it's called, but we don't do anything about that, and we still let the kwila come. So how are we supporting human rights? We know that the human rights abuses are happening. We know that the West Papuan people have a right to self-determination. I think that's sort of the really, when I wrote the book, that's the thing I really wanted to stress. If you look at the way that right was taken away from the Papuan people, right back in the 60s, and now the documentation's there, and nobody can stand up and say it was done in a fair way. It was done in the most hideous way that could be imagined, with this act of free choice, so-called, in 1969. It doesn't stand up to any kind of international scrutiny, and it's been shown that it was phony and fraudulent and people were coerced to the nth degree.
Yes.
Our government knows this. So under international law, customary international law, we're in the wrong if we don't stand up for their rights to self-determination. And that's, that's sort of the crux of it really, and yet we're afraid to do that.
Self-determination for who? Freedom and human rights for who?
Yeah, well that's right. I mean, we're guilty of huge hypocrisy, really, saying that we support these freedoms and yet do nothing about them. And hypocrisy too in our, we're supposed to, in New Zealand, now be aware of the rights of our own Indigenous people and to be pursuing the treaty and making amends for past wrongs. How can we support rangatira if we don't support it in the Pacific, you know. It doesn't make any sense, really.
Somehow I think the New Zealand government got caught out on that one.
Well,
really. In recent years there's been a mounting call to bring Papua back into the Pacific family.
yes.
How's that going?
Yes. Well, New Zealand is being shown up, really,
Yes.
because New Zealand's weakness on this issue is being shown up by the principled stand taken by Vanuatu. And Vanuatu in recent years has been joined by several other Pacific nations in taking the issue of West Papua to the United Nations, to the floor of the General Assembly, to the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and they actually intend, their proposal for this year is that they will take the issue of the need of the West Papuan issue to go back on the agenda of the Decolonisation Committee. And what Vanuatu intends is to table a resolution in the General Assembly later this year. So that's an absolutely vital initiative. And for that to progress, of course, it needs much more support. And I think, you know, a critical key could be if New Zealand could decide to stand with Vanuatu, it would make a huge difference.
Well, it would seem that Pacific people are looking to New Zealand to take a lead. Palau had done something, hadn't they?
They were one of the nations that spoke up in the UN.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a little difficult to track the support at government level because things can change a wee bit with changes in government. Like there was a Prime Minister in the Solomon Islands, Salgavari, who was incredibly strong, but the current one seems to be not quite so strong. So it's always hard to track where things are with governments, but certainly if you track things with the ordinary people in the Pacific, the grassroots, it's much more aware and much stronger in support of West Papua, and where that campaign plays out often is on social media. And of course it has links back here to Aotearoa, because one of the strongest solidarity groups we've got here in Aotearoa is Oceania Interrupted, which is a group essentially for Pacifica and Maori women, and their work and their activities and their focus on publicising the human rights issues and the rights to freedom of the West Papuan people have made a huge difference here, but I think they also make a difference around the Pacific because of those people-to-people networks that work so effectively around the Pacific. It's one of my hopes, actually, is that change may come from that sort of Pacific direction, and perhaps even there including Pacific people who are now in our parliament, because they have been strong supporters of the West Papuan cause, despite the fact that they don't always get support from the upper levels of their own parties.
I was thinking about that on the train coming in today, and I think everywhere there's a real difference between the people and the governments.
Absolutely. People
everywhere seem to be good.
Yes.
As far as I can tell.
Yeah. Including, of course, I should emphasise, Indonesia.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I can't go so far as to say some of my best friends are Indonesians, but I believe the best of them.
Of course. And what's been happening more recently is stronger human rights campaigns and initiatives taken on the part of NGOs in Indonesia for West Papua. You know, and that was one of the critical things when Timor-Leste got its independence, that there was beginning to be a groundswell in Indonesia for the Timorese cause. So I think that's a very important part to give consideration to.
What can we do to help West Papuans gain political rights and self-determination?
Well, we should support the solidarity, people who feel concerned about the issue should support the solidarity movement in this country. We do what we can to try and make sure the issue comes up from below the radar, where unfortunately it still sits for a lot of the time, so that people are more conscious and aware of the issue. Support our initiatives in banning Quila and demanding that the government change its policy on Quila. Support our initiatives in asking our government to cut off military ties with Indonesia. and just generally pressing the government in whatever way they feel they can do best to change. I mean, I think the Labour Party must be a bit vulnerable on this issue. You know, it doesn't sit well. They can't justify it,
but there's often a difference between the party and the
the grassroots. Yes.
Often there's quite a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And you know, that upper level, they really want power. You know.
Of course, I should note that the Green Party is solidly for self-determination.
Yes.
And has been for 2 decades now. So, yeah. And the group in Parliament that supports West Papua is cross-parliamentary.
Yes.
So that's a strong thing too.
Yes.
It isn't just the Greens by any manner of means. Very strong, some very strong Labour MPs are supporting it.
To me, it seems to be an inevitability. But how long? You know, how long is it going to take?
Yeah.
And how much, you know, how many lives, how much time will be wasted?
Yeah, that's right.
How much environment will be destroyed in the process?
I really, you know, when I start to read some of the material that I've been reading recently about plans for ginormous palm oil plantations that will absolutely ravage the forests, I'm very afraid. You know, I'm so afraid of that. And yeah, we really haven't got too much time. We haven't got too much time even for our, you know, if you think about that environmental issue, for all our sakes really, for the sake of our grandchildren, they want a habitable planet to inherit.
Okay, well, that's all very good. Wonderful book. See No Evil. Beautifully, immaculately researched and very well written.
Oh, thank you, Martin.
It was
Appreciate
a real
it.
joy to read it.
Oh, thank you, Martin. Appreciate it.
I hope many other people do.
Yes.